tell the truth and nothing but the truth and the penalty of law?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Good morning, Mr. Dixon.
Good morning.
I believe when we recessed, we were talking about the time when you were up near Mr. Boyd's belongings. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And when you were up in the area near Mr. Boyd's belongings, did you use your camera to take any photographs?
I did.
And what did you photograph?
I photographed a clear plastic tarp. There were bags under the tarp and appeared like clothing, food, other items, things of that nature.
Okay, and why did you take that photograph?
I wanted to document it in case the police were to ever need it.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as Defendant Perez's Exhibit E25 for identification purposes. What does that photograph depict, Mr. Dixon?
It depicts what I described earlier. You have a clear plastic tarp. Towards the right, you can see a book bag. You can see things under the tarp. You can see other, I guess you could call them like household items, things of that nature.
And does Defendant Perez's Exhibit E25 fairly and accurately represent the photograph you took when you were standing near Mr. Boyd's back?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move Defendant Perez's Exhibit E25. I'm going to bring this, that photograph up on the screen next to you so we can talk about it. If you would, for the jury, can you please orient us to where this photograph was taken?
This is the nest of rocks where he was camping. And just ahead, you can see Copper Trail. I think I can actually draw a line on it. So there's Copper Trail. And this would be my house.
Okay. And is that a balcony on your house?
Yes.
Okay. And is there someone there on Copper Trail?
Yes.
Can you circle those individuals?
There's two people. They appear to be hikers.
Okay. And during the time you lived at your house at 1812 Piedra Vista, was it common to see people using that trail?
Yes.
Was it a daily occurrence to see people using that trail?
Yes, especially on the weekends.
If you'll go ahead and clear your screen by clicking the lower left-hand corner.
Lower left-hand
May I approach?
corner.
Up.
Let's try this.
All right, you got it. So how long did you stay up at that location near Mr. Boyd's belongings?
The first time I stayed for about 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay. And the second time, how long did you stay?
About, I'd say, closer to 15 minutes.
Okay. And did you ever come in contact or inspect Mr. Boyd's items?
No.
Now, do you know what time it was when you actually departed from that area and went back to your house?
I think that would have been around 3:30 p.m. Or, yeah, so approximately 3:30.
Okay, and how long did it take you to get back to your house?
About 5 minutes from that location.
Okay. And at any time when you were up there near Mr. Boyd's belongings, did you actually see Mr. Boyd?
No.
Now, when you returned home, what was the next thing you did?
Once I returned home, I had a neighbor come by and inform me that
Without telling me what was specifically said by your neighbor, Mr. Thixton, who did you have a conversation with?
I had a conversation with the neighbor.
Okay. And after having that conversation, what did you do?
I went up to my balcony to see if I could see Mr. Boyd.
Okay. And were you able to see Mr. Boyd?
No.
Okay. And after you were unable to see Mr. Boyd, what did you do?
I called police because I believed that he was present there, but that I just could not see him.
Okay. And did you call 911 or a non-emergency number?
I called the police non-emergency number.
And why did you decide to call the police non-emergency number?
I didn't find anything like drugs or weapons or stolen property. His temperament at the time appeared to be normal for that day.
And whose temperament are you referring to?
That would be James Boyd's.
So was there a time you actually were able to see him?
Yes, later I could see him sitting on one of the rocks.
Okay. And after you called the police non-emergency line, what did you do?
I went up to my balcony to look at that area.
Okay, and what area were you specifically looking at?
That was the area that Mr. Boyd was camping with. And when I went up the second time to look, that's when I saw him sitting on the rocks.
Okay. And after you saw Mr. Boyd sitting on the rocks, what did you do?
I called the police non-emergency line again to let them know for their awareness that he had returned.
And why did you feel it was necessary to let the police know that he had returned?
Just for their situational awareness so they would be better prepared.
And based on your understanding and your observations, did police actually respond?
Yes.
Okay, and where did the police officers respond to?
They responded to my house.
Okay, and how many officers responded?
There were 2.
And if you could, were you able to see the vehicles they were driving?
Yes.
Can you please describe the appearance of those vehicles?
They had, I think they each drove separately. It was 2 SUVs.
And did you speak to the officers who came to your house?
Yes.
If you could, can you please first describe their appearance?
The officers were in full uniform.
Okay, and when you say full uniform, what do you mean?
They were in a black uniform. They had badges. They had, I don't know what you call it, the belts, the gear on them.
Okay, and if you could, please describe the demeanor of the officers who came to your house.
They were professional.
When you say they were professional, what do you specifically mean?
They asked if I was the one who made the call, and then they just asked details about where he was located.
Okay, and what did you tell the officers as to where Mr. Boyd was located?
I led them through to the backyard, and I actually showed them where Mr. Boyd was located, and I gave them directions on how they could get to that area.
And why did you need to give the officers directions as to how they could get to the area where Mr. Boyd was located?
Because there's a nest of rocks where he was camping at, and there was another nest of rocks as well. It's rugged foothills, so if they were to go to another location to go up to him, they'd have to find the correct nest of rocks.
When you say it's rugged foothills, what do you mean?
It's when you get off the dirt path, it goes to the mound. The mound starts at a steep incline. There's a number of boulders and ridges. There's like lots of brush there. It's a little complex.
Okay. And after you pointed out where Mr. Boyd was located, what happened?
The officers told me that so that Mr. Boyd would not associate where the phone call originated from, they would drive down to Copper Avenue, take Copper Avenue and walk up the trail to Mr. Boyd's location.
And after they provided you with that information, did the officers in fact leave your residence?
Yes.
Okay. And after the officers left, what did you do?
I went back up to my second-story balcony.
And why did you go up to your second-story balcony?
That's where I had the best view of Mr. Boyd.
Okay, and was that the balcony that you showed us in Defendant Perez's Exhibit E25?
Yes.
Did you have a clear view of where Mr. Boyd was located from your balcony?
Yes.
And if you could, can you please describe the weather on this day?
It was, it was a good, how would you say it? It was a pleasant day. They're partly cloudy, but visibility was pretty good during the day.
Was there anything that obstructed your view of the area where Mr. Boyd was located?
No.
Now, from your balcony, in addition, I understand that you watched some of the incidents that took place that day. Is that
Yes.
correct? In addition to watching them, did you record the incidents that took place using any type of audio or video recording device?
Yes.
And before I talk to you about the actual devices you used, will you please explain to the jury why you decided to record the incident?
At the time, I thought it would be good to document the encounter, just to provide, video provides the best version of events as they took place.
Okay. And what specifically did you record this incident with?
I had two cameras. I had it was a Canon SX280 camera. That was my good camera, and I also recorded with my phone camera.
Okay, and when you say recorded, did both of those devices have an actual video recording function?
Yes.
Okay, and why did you use those two devices instead of just using one?
Because the Canon had it had a poor battery life when recording in video. It lasted, I'd say, about 7 minutes before you had to recharge the battery again.
So that is why you used your iPhone and your Canon?
Correct. I'd use the iPhone to augment the times when I could not record with the Canon when that was charging.
Okay. And did you videotape the entire incident that occurred on March 16th, 2014?
No.
How much of the incident, approximately, did you actually videotape?
Just over an hour.
Okay. And how did you decide what to videotape?
Part of it was based on when I'd have to charge the camera to pull out the other camera. Part of it was based on highlights as to what was going on, because this standoff lasted for 2.5 or 3 hours. It was quite a long standoff. So, there were some times I was just doing errands inside the house, and I guess the best way to say when I chose was when I felt it would be something that would be most significant. I can't say it was actually when it was most significant or not, but it was just my approach.
Okay. And after you videotaped this incident using your Canon and your iPhone, did you transfer the videotapes to another device?
Yes.
And please explain what you transferred that video to.
I had a number of video clips on both my camera and my phone. So I transferred all those video clips over to my computer.
And did you watch the videos before you transferred them?
Yes, I was able to review them on my devices.
Okay, and did you watch them after you transferred them?
Yes.
Okay, and after you transferred them, were the videos still a fair and accurate representation of what you actually videotaped?
Yes.
And once the videos were downloaded onto your computer, did you do anything to edit the videos?
Yes. So because I had to go back and forth from one camera to the other, you had many different files, and it was kind of hard to really get an idea of what was going on when you watched it piece by piece between two different devices. So what I did, I make and edit videos. I just put them all together sequentially, so you could watch it from beginning to end.
Okay. And is it fair to say you compiled the videos that you took?
Yes.
And when you were compiling those videos, did that change any of the content of the videos?
No.
And did you do anything to enhance the audio or video quality of these videos that you took?
No.
And did you make any annotations to the videos that to this video compilation that you created?
Yes. I added time. Yeah, I added timestamps to denote the time, and I also added what camera was being used. So, because you had different clips that were compiled together, they were from two different cameras. So I thought it would be relevant to put what type of camera and at what time the clip was that you were viewing.
Okay, and why did you decide to add timestamps to this video compilation?
Because I had the data. Whenever you record a video with either device, you can look up its file properties and you can see the time. And I think it was beneficial to put the exact time that that video was taken so you can put events together.
Okay, and you mentioned file properties?
Yes.
What are those?
You have a video file. You can actually look at the file properties. It will tell you when the video was created. It'll tell you when the video was modified. So all I'd have to do is just right-click on the file, hit properties. I could see when that video was created.
Okay. And did you record that time that you observed in the file properties on your actual compilation?
Yes.
Now you also mentioned that you added what camera was being used. You annotated that into the compilation, correct?
Yes.
And why did you choose to do that?
The Canon camera and the iPhone camera were a little different. The Canon camera has a magnifier. It can zoom up to 20 times so you can see very closely what your subject is. Where the iPhone was kind of just, I guess, a wider field of view. So you could almost barely see the subject. You could see where he was. You could see where the officers were, but it was a much wider field of view. The audio that I picked up with the iPhone was better than the audio that I picked up with the Canon camera. And as it went to dusk, the iPhone appeared brighter than the Canon because the Canon records what the actual lighting conditions are when you're taking that video, whereas the iPhone uses some processing to try to make all of your pictures look as well as exposed as possible.
Okay, so the Canon is a better representation of the actual lighting. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And the iPhone tends to make things lighter. Is that correct?
It tries to balance the picture, so when it's darker, it'll try to make it a little bit lighter.
Okay. Now I'd actually like to play a few, I'm not going to play the whole compilation, but a few clips of your video, and I'd like to talk to you about those clips. And with the court's permission, I'm going to play a clip from Defendant Perez's Exhibit B4 that lasts from minute 35 to minute 50. Or, I'm sorry, second 35 to second 50, Your Honor.
Sweetheart. She's got a knife.
Okay, and it wasn't quite clear, at least on my screen, but what time did you take that video clip at?
That was around 5 p.m.
Okay. And were you located on your balcony when you took that clip?
Yes.
And did you use any type of zoom function when you were taking that clip?
Yes, that was with the Canon camera, so what you were seeing was a 20 times zoom. So it was magnifying my field of view.
Okay, and did your videotape using that Canon camera clearly pick up everything that was being said by the officers and Mr. Boyd?
Not necessarily. The audio was a little hard to understand. You'd have to be wearing headphones to hear the audio that the Canon was picking up.
Okay, but from where you were located that day, were you able to hear sounds that were not picked up on your camera?
Yes.
And please explain what you heard during this clip that we just watched, if anything.
The two officers were telling Mr. Boyd repeatedly, drop the knife.
Okay. When you say repeatedly, approximately how many times do you remember the officers asking Mr. Boyd to drop the knife?
Over and over again. I don't know.
Okay. Now, in the clip we just listened to, you said he's got a knife. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did you hear or see that led you to say he's got a knife?
He was behind the rocks, so at that time I couldn't see what was in his hands. I could only see his head. But the officers had their guns drawn, and they were saying, drop the knife, as they backed away.
And that's what you based your statement on?
Yes.
And throughout this incident, was there a time when you actually saw Mr. Boyd holding knives in his hands?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll talk about that clip in a moment. Now, as you were filming this initial interaction that was taking place between the officers and Mr. Boyd, please explain what Mr. Boyd's demeanor was like, based on your observations.
It looked like he was hostile.
It looked like he was hostile.
Yes.
And why do you say it looked like he was hostile?
Because when they went up to confront him, he stood up. He was kind of making his way a little closer to them. He was yelling at them.
Okay. So he was moving towards the officers.
Yes.
Okay. And based on your observations of that interaction that you saw between Mr. Boyd and those two open space officers, who did you think was the aggressor in that situation?
Objection, Your Honor. Personal knowledge and speculation.
Mr. Boyd.
And why did you think he was the aggressor in that situation?
Because he pulled knives on them.
Now, Your Honor, I'd like to play another clip with the court's permission from Defendant Perez Exhibit B4. And this clip is from 1 minute 37 seconds to 1 minute 52 seconds.
Counsel, this is consistent with virtual vote?
Yes.
They've got their guns on him. He's got a knife on him. He's not cooperating.
Now, is it fair to say that video clip was taken shortly after the first clip we watched?
Yes.
Okay. And during the video clip, you can be heard saying they've got their guns on him. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did you mean when you say they've got their guns on him?
They were pointing at the threat, which would have been Mr. Boyd.
Okay. And were you surprised that the officers had their guns drawn?
If someone pulled a knife on me and I had a gun, I would do the same. I cannot say that I was surprised that that's how they would react.
Objection, Your Honor. 41424.
And during the video clip we just listened to, you can be heard saying he's got a knife on him. Is that correct?
Yes.
And why did you make that statement?
Because that's when my wife came in. So I told her what I had heard and what I was observing.
Okay, so you're relaying that information to your wife.
Correct.
And lastly, during the clip that we just saw, you said he's not cooperating. Is that correct?
Correct.
Please explain what you saw or heard that led you to make that statement.
They told him to drop the knives, or drop the knife, and he did not appear to be complying.
I'm going to play another clip for you from your video, Mr. Thixton, with the court's permission. This is from Defendant Perez's Exhibit B4 from minute 3:55 to minute 4 and 5 seconds.
He said he's gonna kill him.
Okay, and when you said he's gonna kill them, who were you referring to?
Mr. Boyd,
Okay, and what did you hear or observe that led you to believe Mr. Boyd was going to kill the officers?
Mr. Boyd,
Our speculation is not what happened, it's just relaying what we heard, and not that he believed he was going to.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. What did you see or hear that led you to say he's gonna kill them?
I heard
Same objection, Clarence. Misleading.
I heard Mr. Boyd say to the officers that he was going to kill them.
Okay, and will you please describe the tone of Mr. Boyd's voice when he threatened to kill the officers?
He said it with hostility.
Okay, and will you please describe Boyd's general demeanor when he was threatening to kill the officers?
He was angry.
And why did you think he was angry? Based on your observations.
Based on my observations, it's because I don't think he wanted them near him.
Okay. And based on your observations, did you see anything that indicated to you that Mr. Boyd was afraid?
It didn't look like it.
And why didn't it look like he was afraid?
He was not complying. He was not backing away. He stood his ground and he was yelling at them.
And what concerns did you have standing on your balcony when you heard Mr. Boyd threaten to kill officers?
It kind of confirmed my worst fears that
Excuse me, Your Honor. 401, 402, 403.
this guy was.
One second. I'm not allowed a question.
Okay. And do you need a moment, Mr. Thixton?
Yeah.
Okay.
It confirmed to me that he was dangerous.
Mr. Thixton, I'm going to play another clip for you, and this is a clip from Defendant Perez's Exhibit D4, minute 9, 5 seconds to minute 8, or to minute 9, 18 seconds.
Mr. Dixon, I'm gonna have counsel give you just a minute.
Thank you.
And take as much time as you need, Mr. Thixton.
Mr. Irish, can you take
Okay, I'm ready.
She has absolutely no idea what's going on.
If you would, for the jury, please explain what you just filmed in that clip we saw.
There was a jogger running past the incident that was occurring.
Okay, and why did you choose to record that jogger running past the incident?
Because she wasn't aware of what was happening about 50 feet away from her.
Okay. So based on your approximation and the time that you were up there, that trail where that woman was jogging was approximately 50 feet away from where Mr. Boyd was.
Yes.
And as you videotaped, or as we heard on the videotape, you said she has absolutely no idea what's going on. Is that correct?
Correct.
What did you see or observe that led you to say she has absolutely no idea what's going on?
She was not aware that there was a standoff between Mr. Boyd and officers.
And you referred to this as a standoff. Why do you describe it as a standoff?
Because he was not complying and he was not cooperating with officers.
Okay. Now, what concerns did you have as you videotaped that woman run by?
She was pretty close to harm's way.
Okay, and why do you believe she was close to harm's way?
Because she was near someone who was threatening police with their guns drawn at him.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'm going to play another clip from Defendant Perez's Exhibit B4, and that is from minute 10 to minute 10:53, and it has been clipped to comply with the court's order.
And he has a hand in his pocket. He's just not, he's not cooperating.
I'm going to pause the video. On that day, were you able to see what was in Mr. Boyd's right hand at that point?
I could see it through the camera.
Okay. And what was in his right hand, Mr. Dixon?
It was a shiny object that appeared to be a pocket knife.
Okay. We'll go ahead and continue watching this clip.
He's dangerous.
I received a telephone call from Detective Sandy.
Okay. And were you on duty when you spoke to Detective Sandy?
No, I was not.
And where were you located when you spoke to Detective Sandy?
I live in Las Lunas, so I was leaving my daughter's soccer practice, and it was in Las Lunas.
Okay. And after speaking with Detective Sandy, what did you do?
I drove my daughter home from practice. I changed my clothes and got in my work truck and started to proceed to work.
Okay, and when you say you started to proceed to work, what do you mean?
So I got in my government vehicle, because I was in my personal vehicle at the time, and got ready to come into town. So I started driving into town.
Okay, and where were you driving to in town?
The description, according to the dispatcher, was 812 Piedra Vista, I believe.
And why is it that you decided to respond to 812 Piedra Vista?
The information that I received from Detective Sandy was that he was requested with a taser shotgun, and I also had a taser shotgun. So I felt that if we had one, we could probably use another one at a scene, so I decided to go two.
Okay. Why did you think it would be beneficial to have two taser shotguns instead of just one?
Not knowing the entire circumstance of what we're doing, but having different areas or coverage within that particular incident, that we could use it from another perspective if we needed to.
Okay. And before we move on, I'd like to briefly talk to you about what a taser shotgun actually is. So to begin, just briefly describe what a taser shotgun is for the jury.
So a taser shotgun is a less lethal device that we have or had at the time in the police department. The device is shot from a 12-gauge shotgun platform, but it's a non-lethal round. So it's basically an encapsulated taser device inside a body that is shot through the shotgun to give an extended range and feed to a subject. The shotgun round itself basically has like large barbs on the front, kind of like a cactus, and then it's got a body that breaks off that houses the battery and the charge. And then that part also has what they describe as more barbs, which are like a large cactus quill, if you will. And that's meant to penetrate clothing and gain that exposure to the skin.
And how is a taser shotgun different than a normal taser that you would carry on your belt as an officer?
So the charge itself is very similar, but because it's encapsulated, you can reach out to a further distance and affect that control with it. The other difference is it does give a longer duration of the electric incapacitation charge. That one's 20 seconds, and that's designed to allow the officers to move up to effect an arrest during that time that that taser charge is still en route. The handheld taser is only 5 seconds, so it's intended for a much closer distance.
And at the time of the March 16th, 2014 incident, were you certified to use that taser shotgun?
I was.
And if you could, very briefly, please explain what process you underwent to become certified to use that tool.
Sure. So another classroom style portion of instruction from an instructor, and then after that classroom instruction, then we would go out to the range and then we do a qualification with that particular system. And that one in qualification was firing a couple rounds at a blank target to verify the usage of the system.
Okay. And in addition to firing the taser shotgun during that training course, had you ever used a taser shotgun prior to the March 16th, 2014 incident?
I had not, no.
Okay. And had you seen them used?
I had seen them used, yes.
Okay. And if you could briefly describe how effective a taser shotgun is based upon you having seen it been used.
The taser shotgun can be effective in basically limiting or incapacitating somebody's movement and being able to do that.
Now, going back to March 16th, how much time did it take you to travel from your daughter's soccer practice to the location of the incident?
I would say about 30 minutes.
Okay, and during the time that you were traveling, what, if any, other information did you gather about the incident that was taking place?
I spoke with Detective Sandy briefly. He advised that he was en route to a call in which a subject had possibly assaulted officers with knives, and that I was trying to get my computer booted up as it was not obviously running and wasn't on duty, and trying to get the rest of the information before I got on scene.
Okay. In addition to hearing that the subject, and we know that subject to be Mr. Boyd, correct?
That's correct.
And in addition to hearing that Mr. Boyd had threatened officers with knives, did you learn any other information about what was taking place?
I started scanning the foothills frequency to try to find out what they were doing and what they had was going on. I was just trying to decipher what the situation was and what they were doing with that particular subject.
Okay. And were you able to gather any specific information about what was going on at the scene?
That he was kind of in the open space area, and they had attempted to try to negotiate with him. That's about all I had at that time.
Okay. And did you respond to the actual open space area or another location?
The address given to me by dispatch was a street address there in the foothills, and so I responded to that address, and then I accessed the open space area through that citizen's yard.
Okay, and so after you arrived at that residence, and that's 1812 Piedra Vista, correct?
That's correct.
After you arrived at that specific address, what did you do?
Because I wasn't equipped to go to work, I had to get out and put on all my stuff, so I had to do that while I was there.
Okay, and when you say put on all of your stuff, what do you mean?
I had to put on my soft body armor. And the Repeat Offender Project, we were outfitted with heavier armor for rifle threats. So I had to put that on. I had to get, at this point, I got my rifle, I got my taser shotgun, and ensured that I had eye protection at that time.
Okay, and why did you put on this body armor that you'd mentioned?
Anytime we are doing anything with police work, we are wearing our body armor. this particular area and everything else that we have, the rifle armor is augmented armor from what a field officer would normally have, so it affords us more protection.
Okay. And you mentioned that you also gathered your rifle or picked up your rifle. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And why did you choose to do that?
Again, not knowing what my job or role is going to be later on down the road, I try to be as prepared as possible and take everything. So not knowing what I was going to be doing specifically, taking all that equipment was essential.
And if you had been told by Detective Sandy that a taser shotgun was needed, why did you actually deploy with a rifle?
Again, just taking all the equipment that we could, not knowing what my role was going to be once I got on scene.
Based on your training and experience, can roles change as scenes develop?
They can.
And lastly, you mentioned that you also took a taser shotgun with you, correct?
That's correct.
And how did you carry both your taser shotgun and your rifle?
They were on slings, so they were slung weapons so that my hands can still be free, but I still have both weapons on my body.
So despite having those weapons, your hands were free, correct?
Yes.
And lastly, you mentioned that you put on eyewear, correct?
I did.
What type of eyewear did you put on?
At that time of day, and the later time in the afternoon, I put on clear glasses at that time.
Why did you?
On
I'm
the
sorry.
time the sun going down.
Okay.
I didn't want to be caught with my sunglasses on if I didn't need them.
Okay. Now, in addition to the gear that you've talked about, did you have any recording devices on your person?
I did.
And please explain what recording devices you were equipped with.
I actually had two. So I had a digital camera and a digital recorder. So I had two.
And why did you have both a digital camera and a digital recorder?
Based on past experience with the digital cameras, we were having issues with that particular platform of cameras. So I wanted to ensure that it had both, and I was meeting SOP or the standard operating procedures, so I took both.
Okay. And are digital recorders also referred to as belt tapes?
Yes, that's correct.
And following the March 16th, 2014 incident, were both your lapel and your digital recorder collected into evidence?
The digital recorder was, yes.
And who collected your digital recorder?
Criminalistics personnel within the crime band collected that.
And do you know why that individual did not collect your digital camera?
I immediately disclosed to everybody and with the criminalistics band that I didn't think the camera caught anything. It didn't seem to be functioning as designed. So I immediately explained to him that I don't think the camera got anything at that time.
Okay. Did there come a time when your camera was collected?
It was several days later, but it was, yes.
And who collected it?
I want to say one of the detectives, but I don't remember specifically who I turned it over to.
Okay. So after you got all of this gear on, please explain what you did.
There was a lady in the driveway of the house, and she told me that I could go around kind of the south side of her house, kind of directed me around. So I went through the gate and met with Detective Sandy in the open space area.
Okay, when you say went through the gate, what gate are you referring to?
It was on the east side of their property, kind of adjoining to the open space area.
Okay, and when you walked through that gate, please explain to the jury what you saw.
There were several officers up higher on the hill communicating with a male subject at some distance. They were several yards above where that gate was. So there were several yards east of that. And so I kind of just walked out to the trailhead area and met with the personnel that were there.
Okay, and when you walked through that gate, were you able to tell where Mr. Boyd was located?
Based on the positioning of the officers that were already on scene, he was on a large outcropping further to the east.
Okay. And were you actually able to see Mr. Boyd?
He was standing up, yes.
Okay, and can you please describe his appearance?
He had kind of longer brown hair, kind of had a black and gray mechanic style shirt.
And at that time, were you able to get a good read on what Mr. Boyd's demeanor was Like?
His demeanor, I mean, the officers were standing off from him. They did not. I mean, they weren't very close to him, within like an arm's reach, but it looked like they were trying to communicate with him from distance. He sounded like I couldn't tell exactly what he was saying, but he was acting like he was animated. So it seemed like he was boisterous, but I couldn't quite make out the conversation at that time.
Okay, and did Mr. Boyd's position up on that hill cause you any concerns?
It did.
What concerns did that cause you?
For officers to be able to traverse through that area and be in that rocky area was already a hazard, but up on that rock where he was at, it was significantly higher than where we were at the trailhead, significantly higher than what I would want to operate with, because he has kind of a height advantage. He can see the outlay of everything that we have to work with, but we can't see everything that he has to work with. So he's in a position of advantage over us because he's been able to look down at us and see that, see everything that we have, but we can't see everything that he has.
And after you walked through that gate that we've discussed and observed the terrain of that area, what did you do next?
I walked towards Detective Sandy, and I believe there was a couple canine officers there.
Okay, and where was Detective Sandy located when you walked towards him?
For point of reference, there is a large trail that kind of runs north and south there. There is a larger tree to the kind of north and east of the property that we went through, and so they were somewhat near that point.
Okay. And when you saw Detective Sandy, was he carrying any weapons?
He did have his department rifle and his taser shotgun and his sidearm.
So he was equipped basically like you were.
That's correct.
Now, after you saw Detective Sandy, what did you do next?
We were talking to the canine officers, trying to figure out what the situation was.
Okay. And what did you learn about the situation during that conversation?
We did learn that there was 2 open space officers that made contact with Mr. Boyd, that he at some point produced knives, and that during that time they backed away and felt threatened by him.
And what, if any, concerns did that information cause you?
It causes me great concern because I know at some point in time this subject has committed a felony offense, and at some point in time he's going to be arrested for that offense. And because he's armed and because he has that capacity, it causes me more stress that this is going to be a hazardous situation to work through.
When you said, that you knew at some point in time he was going to be taken into custody, what do you mean by that?
He was going to be arrested for the offense of the aggravated assault on the other officers.
And how long did that meeting last that you had with, I believe you said, Detective Sandy and canine officers?
I don't recall the specific amount of time, but it was a few minutes.
Okay. And why did that meeting come to an end?
We started kind of moving into position. We moved up a little bit to the east.
When you say you moved up a little bit to the east, please explain to the jury what you mean.
So there was, from where we were at, we were still a little bit too far to affect any custody procedure or negotiation with Mr. Boyd from that first position at the trailhead. So we took a secondary position along a large piece of granite that was about half the distance to Mr. Boyd and where we were at initially.
Okay, and why did you move up to what you've described as a large piece of granite?
The large piece of granite afforded us some cover, and being in that position, we could see more and kind of find out what we needed to do.
And who made the decision to move up to that large piece of granite, if you know?
I don't know.
Okay. Did you make that decision?
No, I didn't.
You mentioned that large piece of granite provided you with cover. What is cover?
In police lingo, we use cover as something that would stop a bullet or stop a round of that effect. Cover is that kind of device or apparatus that would stop that. So a large piece of granite would be cover.
Why were you concerned with having cover?
Not being able to see everything that Mr. Boyd had access to and the position that he was in, much higher, elevated from us, presented a very significant harm to us because we can't obviously stand out open in the open space area, not knowing what he had access to. So using that position of cover afforded us a little bit of protection at that point and kind of gave us a little bit more of an area to operate in and be able to organize our efforts, if you will.
So you went from standing near the tree to that piece of granite, correct?
That's correct.
And when you were at that piece of granite, were you able to see Mr. Boyd?
I was.
Can you please describe his appearance at that time?
Same as before with that gray shirt, and he was pacing back and forth around that outcropping area where he was at.
Okay. And were you able to hear Mr. Boyd, anything he was saying?
At that point, we were able to start to get more of the conversation of what he was talking about and what he was doing.
And what was he talking about?
He was talking about a lot of things. He was talking about getting a hotel voucher.
Anything else?
At that time, Officer Weimerskirch from K-9 ended up taking over most of the communications with him and started to try to figure out what his needs were, what we could do to help him out.
And when did you first come in contact with Officer Scott Weimerskirch?
I don't remember exactly if he joined us at the trailhead or if it was at that piece of granite.
Okay. And at that point when Scott Weimerskirch was there, at least, who was present at that piece of granite?
So it was myself, Detective Sandy, and Officer Weimerskirch at that point.
Okay. Now I'd like to talk to you about some additional information that you gathered as you got closer to Mr. Boyd. And to do that, I'd like to use your digital recorder or your belt tape as you've referenced. And since the incident, have you listened to your belt tape?
I have.
And did you recognize your voice on that belt tape?
I have.
The voice of your fellow officers?
Yes, I have.
Mr. Boyd's voice?
Yes, I have.
And when that audio recording was it created contemporaneously with the incident that the belt tape was recording?
That's correct.
And are belt tapes, based on your understanding, kept by APD officers and APD in the regular course of business?
They are.
And based on your review of your belt tape, is it a true and accurate recording of your encounter with Mr. Boyd on March 16th of 2014?
It is.
Now, there is also a transcript of your belt tape recording, correct?
That's correct.
Have you had an opportunity to review that transcript?
I have.
Did you have an opportunity to compare the transcript with your actual belt tape recording?
Yes, I have.
And did that transcript, was it an accurate and fair representation of what was captured on your digital recorder?
Yes, it was.
Your Honor, at this time, I move Defendant's Exhibit C4, which is Sergeant Richard Ingram's belt tape, and Defendant's Exhibit D8, which is a transcript of his belt tape. And based on our earlier conversation before lunch, Your Honor, we can simply submit a disc that contains the clips that I'm going to play.
And with that, Your Honor, depending on what those are, if they're actually relevant, we would not necessarily have an objection, but would like, we don't know what they're going to play. So we object to the whole thing coming in.
So can you, for counsel, indicate page 10-1?
There are several.
Well, just one.
Okay, absolutely. And the first,
Can you give them the first one now so I can look it up while you're asking questions?
yes. The first one that I intend on playing in a moment, Your Honor, is on the transcript. It's page 10, line 11, to page 12, line 25. Now, when you were and we'll get to the belt tape in a moment after counsel has a chance to review that transcript. But when you were at that piece of granite, had you seen Mr. Boyd with his knives?
Yes, I had.
Okay. And could you please describe the appearance of the knives you saw Mr. Boyd holding?
They appeared to be folding knives.
Okay, and will you please describe how Mr. Boyd was handling his knives?
Mr. Boyd had them in his front pockets, and at times when we were instructing him to take them off or put them down, he would become very agitated at us, and he would produce them from his pockets in a very quick manner.
Okay. And with the court's permission, I would like Sergeant Richard Ingram to stand and demonstrate for the jury how Mr. Boyd would take his knives out of his pockets and how he'd put them back into his pockets.
And, sorry,
Yes, ma'am.
when you're physically showing the attorney what you observed, can you describe it for the record as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may ask a question.
Okay. Will you please
Do
demonstrate?
we have a model of the knife?
If you could just, Your Honor, may the witness use a model of the knife to demonstrate?
Any objection?
Yes. Yes, Your Honor. I think it's 403, Your Honor.
Can we approach her?
I overruled it.
Oh,
Oh, you overruled. Never mind. I don't want to approach her.
Now, Sergeant Ingram, I will assure you that these are just dummy knives, for a lack of a better term, but with no blade. And to begin, are the blades on those knives approximately how large the blades on Mr. Boyd's knives were?
They are similar, that's correct.
Okay. And if you will, for the jury, please demonstrate how you saw Mr. Boyd handling his knives.
May I take off my jacket? So both knives were in his front pockets, and I can't tell if they were blades up or blade down, but it was more the motion of if they were in his pockets, he would draw them out very quickly and efficiently, and have them out very quickly out of either pocket. There were times where he would get one knife out, and it was in that kind of stance, that he would get it out very quickly, and I'm sorry, these pants I'm not a little awkward, but he would get them out very quickly.
Okay. Thank you, Sergeant Ingram. And what concerns did you have when you saw Mr. Boyd handling his knives in the manner you've just described for the jury?
My concerns were that Mr. Boyd had at some point became very, in my perception, became very proficient in drawing those knives out of his pocket because of his ability to acquire them quickly and then put them back in a manner that he could draw them out again very quickly. So that was my perception, is that he was very practiced with it.
Now, at the time you arrived at the position of cover you've described near that granite rock, were you still holding your taser shotgun, or were you in possession of that taser shotgun?
I was.
And in terms of lethal or less lethal, how did you view your role in the incident?
At that time, my role was a less lethal option at that time.
Okay, and will you please describe what your understanding, based on your training and experience, of what your role was as less lethal?
Because my role was less lethal, that was my entire responsibility at that time. So once I got into that position of being the taser shotgun assignment, if you will, that consumed my responsibility as being the taser or the less lethal person at that point.
Okay, and did you have any lethal coverage?
I did.
And who was your lethal coverage?
At that time, Detective Sandy.
And based on your observations, was Detective Sandy in possession of his taser shotgun at that time?
I believe at the rock he was, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Did he maintain control of that taser shotgun throughout this incident?
No, I ended up taking it from him.
When did you take Detective Sandy's taser shotgun from him?
I believe it was at that second area that we were at, and because he was so focused on providing the lethal coverage, I took the taser shotgun from him to relieve him of carrying that particular weapon system while he was dealing with that.
And that was a decision you made?
Yes.
After you received Detective Sandy's shotgun, what weapons were you in possession of?
So I now had the 2 taser shotguns, my department rifle, and my sidearm.
Okay, and was it difficult for you to manage the lethal and the less lethal long guns that you had?
Difficult? No. They're all in slings, but it did make it cumbersome to maneuver, especially in that area with all the rocks. It did make it a little bit more cumbersome to move.
Okay. Did all of those rifles have slings?
They did.
So if need be, you could still use your hands?
That's correct.
And why didn't you simply set one of the taser shotguns you had down on the ground?
Not knowing the entire conditions of what we're dealing with, I can't just put down a weapon system knowing that if at some point something changed dynamically, we had to move. I couldn't just leave that system just on the ground, ready for somebody else to pick up or use. So I had to carry it with me. For safety reasons, I couldn't leave it there.
Okay. And was there any advantage to having 2 taser shotguns?
Well, the advantage would be if somebody else needed one, and at some other point I still had access to it. And if something happened to one, I could still have access to another one. So there was some advantage.
Okay. Now I'd like to talk to you about the specific negotiations that were engaged in with Mr. Boyd. And to do that, I would like to play a portion of your ballot tape.
So I don't have an objection up until page 12, line 5, and then I have a form 142 for the objection. And I'm happy to show it to you, Your Honor, if that's helpful.
Would you like us to approach?
Just to give context, Your Honor.
Let me see it first.
So it's 10, which line?
Oh, okay. So the page 7, line 11, page 12, line 45, the objections
After the highlighting.
after line 8, or after line 5.
Line after line, in the middle of line 5.
Yeah, 7, come on.
May I play that clip now, Your Honor?
If I bring the state police guy here, you talk to him?
I'm not for Well, you know what the state police uniform looks like, right? There we go.
Hands up.
Let's resolve this, man. Let's take care of this right now.
Sorry to pass it off on you there, boss.
We tried this once already.
Yeah.
We can give it another shot.
What's your personality?
It'll take a barricade like a rock.
If that's what you're willing to accept, put the knives on the rock, come down and talk to us.
What'd you inform him? I just got here. What's the deal? What kind of knives do you have? Well, you lying to... Ah, dude.
I instructed him, don't fucking try to unarm me anymore. And I want the fuck out of here, back to my family. Who the charismatic fuck are you now? Huh? Who the fuck are you? What the fuck shoots me? I gave you goddamn instructions, man.
I'm just trying to... Hey, man, that's my fault. I thought you said you wanted state police to talk to you.
You said you wanted to see me.
I'll talk to you all day long, dude. Oh. So what branch of the service were you in? You're talking about OSI and everything.
I need to contact OSI. CID.
Or CID?
I'm walking out of here. You better walk the fuck out of here, or you bring the military here. You don't freedom, you freedom.
Now, Sergeant Ingram, in general terms, can you please explain what took place or what was taking place during that clip that we just listened to?
So Officer Wymaskirch is trying to communicate with Mr. Boyd, and at some point he kind of taps the shoulder figuratively of a state police officer to talk to him because he wanted a state police liaison. So the state police officer ends up trying to talk to him, and in that segment you can hear the state police officer giving him a command that to put down the knives and come down. Mr. Boyd's agitation level seems to rise, and so the state police officer kind of backs off, and then Officer Wymaskirch attempts to try to kind of de-escalate the situation or keep talking to him to see what we can do.
Okay, and based on your recollection, can you please describe what Mr. Boyd was doing while Officer Wymaskirch and the state police officer were talking to him?
So he's on that outcropping of rocks that we've kind of described up above us, and he's being very animated. He's pacing back and forth very angrily, moving back and forth around that area as he yells back at us.
And during the video clip we listened to, Mr. Boyd could be heard saying, "I instructed him, don't fucking try to unarm me anymore." Now, based on your observations, who was attempting to unarm Mr. Boyd?
So it was kind of a general command from all the law enforcement at the time, but it came directly from a uniformed state police officer at that time.
Okay. And why was it necessary to disarm Mr. Boyd?
Mr. Boyd presented a very significant danger to everybody, knowing that we were going to have to arrest him or place him in custody. So taking that off, taking his knives off and having that removed from the situation would potentially make this area and this contact much safer for everyone.
And when Mr. Boyd indicated that he'd instructed, you guys not to unarm him, what concerns did that statement cause you?
It's very troubling because he's making very definitive statements that we're not to unarm him. That's very definitive statements to me that he's being non-compliant or not cooperating with us in any shape or form.
And towards the end of the recording, we listened to Mr. Boyd can be heard saying, "I'm not fucking packing up and walking out of here. You better walk the fuck out of here or bring the military here." Did you hear that statement by Mr. Boyd?
I did.
And what concerns did that statement cause you?
That he's very persistent that he does not want to leave there, that we're going to have to leave, and that he's not leaving.
And how did you take Mr. Boyd's statement when he said you better bring the military here?
It concerned me because he's starting to exhibit more signs of delusional thinking, that asking for the military at that point, my concern is that, is he a prior military person? Does he have some experience there that would warrant more caution on my point, or dealing with somebody with PTSD or something like that?
Okay, and why specifically were you concerned about the possibility that Mr. Boyd could have had prior military experience?
Based on his abilities up there on in that terrain, in that environment, that he may have some advanced experience of being able to harm us in some way out there in that particular environment.
Now I'd like to play another clip for you, and it is from Perez's Exhibit C4, and that's from time 11 minutes 52 seconds to 12 minutes 1 second, and it's page 13. Actually, it's page 14, line 1 to line 4.
Same objections, Your Honor? Oh, I understand the ruling. Should I show it to you?
So if there's a 403 objection, that's overruled. With regard to, like, this statement's already in evidence, so it's an opportunity for the attorney to question this witness with regard to this statement.
Your Honor, I believe it's been stated in opening. I don't believe it's in evidence.
Okay, then if it's not, then it's not cumulative. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You know what? You better goddamn find me a motel right now, bastard fuck. I'm gonna hunt you down and kill you. That's my personal problem. You charismatic shitball.
Do you remember when during the course of this incident Mr. Boyd made that statement?
I believe he made it directly to the state police officer that was trying to communicate with him.
Okay. And what concerns did you have after you heard Mr. Boyd yell, "I'm going to hunt you down and kill you, that's my personal promise, you charismatic shitball"?
It's extremely alarming because he's making very definitive threats with very descriptive language.
And when you call that a definitive threat, what do you mean?
It's direct. You take it as what he's saying is my perception is what he's saying. I mean, he's really thinking wants to carry that out. I mean, it's very descriptive to me.
Did you take that threat seriously?
I did.
Why?
It's at some point in time, I know we're going to be trying to affect this encounter into a custody procedure, and he's being very disruptive, very hazardous, and just not being able to communicate normally. But he's very, very disturbed.
Based on your understanding, was Mr. Boyd still in possession of his knives when he made that promise that he was going to kill an officer?
He was.
Now the next clip that I would like to play for you is from Defendant Perez's Exhibit C4. It's from minute 13:45 to minute 17:23, and that is from page 16, line 11, to page 20, line 11.
Yes, Your Honor, lots. Can you approach? Give me a moment. Where are we at? Counsel, officer, can you see where you ended on page 20 again?
Yes, page 20, line 11.